am delighted to have your company to look this evening at Heraldic Hearts. It's particularly important to me to speak on the subject through the Lord Lyon Society because, as you'll see, so many of my illustrations are drawn from the wonderful resources we have in Scotland through the Lyon Register. And of course, the work of the Lord Lyon Society is aimed at digitising and making that register available to as many people as possible. So thank you to everyone here for your support of the Lord Lyon Society and for joining us this evening as I turn to look at Heraldic Hearts. Now, I just need to get my slides up. I think I should be able to share with you. Kevin, if you could confirm once they're running, if you can see them.
It's running, Gillian.
All fine? Right.
Yep, super.
Thank you very much. Well, I was interested to look at Heraldic Hearts, partly because I was invited to give a presentation to the Heraldry Society in England, it must be said, in London, and the date was just a day or two before Valentine's Day, so it seemed highly appropriate to look at the use of hearts, because, of course, people associate heraldry and the imagery of heraldry with symbolism. But those of us who do a lot of work in heraldry know that, in fact, there's often less symbolism in heraldry than we might think. But the most, perhaps one of the most potent symbols that is in use today, of course, is the heart. The love heart, and you can see my slide here is dotted with love hearts. So I thought surely there will be lots of love and hearts in heraldry. Well, my conclusion, as you'll see, is that there are many hearts but little love. And as we go through this evening, you will see that the heart is well used in Scottish heraldry and further afield, but indeed it's not typically there for reasons of romantic love. And we can see this if we start by looking at the words of one of Scotland's famous historical heraldists, Alexander Nisbet, writing in 1722. And he tells us that the other principal part of man, the heart, is frequent in arms upon the account of allusion, event, religion, and of speaking to the name. And there are two things that we can draw out of this quote from Alexander Nisbet. The first is that he introduces the heart as the other principal part of man. Now, he doesn't then expand on what the first principal part of man might be, and I shall draw a veil over that and move on. But you can see that he describes the heart as being frequent in heraldry because of allusion, event, religion, and as speaking to the name. There's no mention there of love. And indeed, hearts tend to be used to denote valour or sincerity, or as a reward for virtue, or because of some historical event, but very rarely, as we shall see, for love. Now, I'm going to focus primarily on Scottish heraldry, but with some honourable mentions to arms from south of the border and further afield. And I'd like to start by introducing what is, I would say, the most famous heart in heraldry, not just Scottish heraldry, but any heraldry, and that is the heart of the Douglases. And you can see here this image of Sir James Douglas, taken from the Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh, the National Portrait Gallery, and he is standing there between King Robert Bruce and Randolph Murray, his two companions in arms in all senses, and you can see his arms. Now, conspicuous that there is no heart in those arms, the blazon would be argent on a chief azure, three stars of the field. So the good Sir James, to those of us from Scotland, the Black Douglas from those from other parts, was Bruce's chief lieutenant in the Wars of Independence from 1306 onwards, and they fought in many campaigns together. And when Bruce died in 1329, he was aware that he had never completed a vow that he had undertaken to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Now, you may well all know the story of the Heart of the Douglases, but I will just share it again because it bears retelling. So on his deathbed, he asked and entrusted Sir James Douglas with this mission, that once Bruce was dead, he wanted his heart to be cut out and placed in a casket. And then Sir James Douglas and some of the other leading knights, the flowers of Scottish chivalry, were to go on a pilgrimage, a crusade to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, to fight the infidel. So in due course, after Bruce died, the Douglas and his fellow Scottish knights set off from Scotland, heading for Jerusalem. Now, I have some views on the wisdom of leaving the country in the hands of an infant monarch with some of its leading soldiers and lieutenants out of the country. And indeed, as history shows, it was perhaps not the strongest position to leave Scotland in. Nevertheless, such was the importance of this crusade to Bruce and to his allies that James Douglas and the others undertook this mission. And while they were sailing towards the Holy Land, they stopped off at the south of Spain and went to the aid of the King of Castile, Alfonso XI. So they put in just near Malaga. People tend to travel today to Malaga for quite different reasons, a bit of a party scene. But in 1330, they stopped him for provisions and to assist King Alfonso XI of Castile. And we can see here, if I can get my slide to move on, there we go. There's a memorial to Douglas, the most loyal comrade in arms, in the small town inland from Malaga of Tiba. And you can see the castle there, the Castillo de la Estrella, the Castle of the Stars, which is on the fields, the plains outside Tiba. And it was on the plain outside this castle that Sir James Douglas and the other Scottish knights fought their last battle. They went into conflict with the Moors on behalf of the king, and they were seriously outnumbered and cut off from the rest of the army. And legend has it that Douglas rode into his last charge, knowing it was his last charge. They were so seriously outnumbered. And he carried Bruce's heart ahead of him, crying, "Lead on, brave heart, as ever thou were wont to do." Now, I suspect that some of this has a lot to do with later historians and romanticists of Scottish history, not least Sir Walter Scott, and some more of him later. But nevertheless, Douglas and the other Scots knights went into battle at Tiba, and all of them were killed. Well, all bar one. Sir William Keith had phoned in sick that morning with a broken arm, so he was the only surviving Scot, and it fell to him to bring the bodies of his comrades, his fallen comrades, back to Scotland, along with the King of the Heart of Bruce. And on the return to Scotland, Douglas was laid to rest in this beautiful vault in St Bride's Kirk in Douglas, and Bruce's heart was placed in Melrose Abbey. Now, it was not reunited with Bruce's body, which lies at Dunfermline Abbey and still does today. Bruce's heart can still be found in Melrose Abbey, and there's a fairly modern marker on the spot where it lies today. But because of the significance of Douglas's mission and being entrusted with the king's heart, thereafter, from 1330 onwards, the Douglases added a heart to their arms. And we can see here the arms of the first Earl of Douglas. So the blazon has gone from being argent on a chief azure 3 stars of the field to argent a heart gules and on a chief 3 stars of the field. This was added to the Douglas arms after 1330, and at some point thereafter, possibly because of social and political ambition, it was decided that the heart was not enough, that they had to denote the fact that this was not anybody's heart, but the king's heart. So at some point thereafter, a crown was added to the heart, and we can see this is the earliest example I've been able to find from the arms of Douglas of Drumlanrig, and this is taken from the armorial of Sir David Lindsay in 1542. And you can see in the first and fourth quarters the Douglas arms there, and the heart is now surmounted with a crown. It's actually an open crown, and again, perhaps because of political ambition or just the need to demonstrate the significance of the family and Douglas's mission in 1330, that crown was eventually changed to an imperial closed crown. It's still seen today in the arms of the head of the Douglas family, the Duke of Hamilton, Douglas Hamilton, and I can show his achievement here. These are the arms of His Grace the Duke of Hamilton. I've taken these from the Lyon Register, and this is just one example of the absolutely beautiful arms that are and the artwork in the Lyon Register. And these were matriculated for the 13th Duke in 1900. And you can see the Douglas arms there in the second and third quarter. Now, interestingly, I have to point this out, and perhaps I know the Lion Clerk is on the call this evening, the Keeper of the Records, so you might wish to have a look. I'm fairly sure this is emblazoned in the register as an imperial crown, but the artwork here shows an open crown. Anyway, a mystery for all of us, but that's the artwork from the 13th Duke's arms in 1900. You can also see the first and fourth quarters there, also quartered themselves, showing the Cinq-Fals of the Hamiltons and the Lymphad of the Earls of Arran. I was struck that such is the significance of the heart and the crowned heart to the Douglases that perhaps there might be examples of it in the Duke of Hamilton's family home in Lennoxlove. So I contacted His Grace, and he's very generously shared some images from his house of instances where that heart is used as symbolism in various pieces of furniture and other items. And I'm delighted to share those with you this evening. This fabulous chair with the embroidery on the seat and the back, showing very clearly the heart crowned with the imperial crown, and this fabulous dinner service, which was made in China in the 1730s for the 5th Duke, and a selection of buttons that would have been used by the household there in silver, showing the heart and the crown as well. So you can see how significant that heart symbol is in heraldry, demonstrating, of course, not romantic love, but fraternal love and valour. In fact, such significance of the Douglas heart that it appears in almost all Douglas arms today, and I've got some extracts from a volume called The Heraldry of the Douglases, published in 1907 by Harvey Johnson. And you can see the multitude of hearts there, some crowned, some not, some quartered, some differenced with borders, a wide range of hearts. In fact, the only exception are the arms of the Douglases of Dalkeith, and they do not bear a heart. And I understand that that branch of the family, the Dalkeith branch of the Douglases, separated from the main branch in the early 1200s. So about 100 years too soon for Sir James Douglas's pilgrimage. So they do not bear a heart on their arms. Now, obviously, we can see here many hearts of Douglas's. There are probably, obviously, too many to comment on individually, but there are a couple I would like to draw to your attention. And this fantastic example, also held in the Lyon office, is on one of the seals in the Lyon office seal collection. And it is the arms of James Douglas. And he was the natural son of the 4th Earl of Morton, and this dates from 1576. Now, the 4th Earl of Morton was an incredibly powerful figure in Scottish politics. He was a Douglas and he was Regent of Scotland. And in amongst his many, many political and social commitments, he found time to father an illegitimate or natural son. So James Douglas was born on the wrong side of the bedsheet. And you can see in the centre of this seal the shield with the Douglas arms. And the heart in this case is debruised. It's surmounted by a bend sinister. And I think it's rather lovely that the bastard bar, the symbolism of illegitimacy, should be shown here over the heart, because what could be more appropriate for a love-begotten child than to show the bend sinister over the heart there. Moving on from Scotland, such is the significance of the Douglas heart that it has found its way south of the border, and I have a few examples of that. Here are the arms of Acres Douglas, the first Viscount Chilston, and he was an MP before his elevation as first Viscount Chilston, and he has the heart very prominently crowned, I would say, a very prominent imperial crown there, and an arrow. The heart is pierced with an arrow as a mark of difference. So a very significant figure at the turn of the century, the previous century, early 1900s, also bears the Douglas arms as part of his achievement. Another example, which was actually brought to my attention by Stephen Keevil, is this rather lovely stall plate from a church in Tunbridge Wells, so very far south in England. And it's the arms of Colin Balfour Trail, who was the holder of the Military Cross. He was killed in action in France in 1918, and this plaque in the church commemorates him. And you can see the very lovely arms here with the Douglas arms in the 4th quarter, and the heart is set on a field ermine, I think. And that will be the mark of difference for his arms there, adopting the Douglas arms. Now, it may seem as though every heart in Scotland in heraldry belongs to the Douglases, but that is not quite the case. So I would like to move on now and look at some other families in Scotland who do bear hearts in their arms. And our first example from another family is very appropriate for all of us heralds. It is the arms of Sir David Lindsay of the Mount, who was Lord Lyon King of Arms from 1542 to 1554. And you can see the very distinctive Lindsay arms there, the gules with the fess chequy, azure and argent. But Sir David Lindsay needed to distinguish his arms from the core stem Lindsay arms. So he did so by adding 3 stars in chief and a heart in base. And of course, both of these are elements of the Douglas arms themselves. So Sir David Lindsay is not a Douglas, but he has chosen to difference his arms by adding very prominent charges from the Douglas arms. Well, why is that? Well, it turns out that Sir David Lindsay married a Douglas, Janet Douglas. I understand she was a seamstress in the royal court. And on marrying her, he decided to adopt key elements of the Douglas arms to difference his arms. So this, in fact, is yet another Douglas heart popping up in the arms of Sir David Lindsay. But perhaps we could say that that heart is there because of love through marriage to Janet Douglas. The next example, and if we were in person, this would be at the quiz stage, I'd be asking if you could identify these arms here. These are, in fact, the arms, as you might be able to work out from the other charges on the arms and the crest, the arms of falconers. We have James Falconer from 1868 and James Falconer of Lavdal from 2003. I think it's a rather lovely little small falcon's head peeping out of the heart in the centre point of the arms from 1868. And you'll notice that not only is there a heart, but yet another 3 stars. And just in case we were in any doubt about the heart and the falcon connection, the crest there is shown as a winged heart. And of course, we can see in the more recent arms from 2003, both recorded in the Lyon register, the falcon there is volant, it's in flight, and it bears a heart on its breast. So you can understand the falconers bearing falcons in their arms, but why do they have a heart? Well, again, this is to denote their marriage within the family to a daughter of the Douglases. So a son of the Falconer family married a daughter of the Douglas Earls of Angus. So this is yet another Douglas heart popping up in Scottish heraldry. The final example in this part is from the Lockhart family, and this is the Tower of Hallbar or Braidwood Castle in Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire. It's actually about 15 miles from the town of Douglas, and it was the home of the Lockharts. It's a fantastic place. You can see here the painted ceiling in the main hall. Now, this is a modern reproduction of the painted ceiling, but right in the centre of the painted ceiling is the arms, the Lockhart arms, showing the 3 boar's heads in chief, and then this heart within a fetterlock in the middle. Now, the tower was in ruins and it was actually renovated within the last 20 years or so and turned into holiday accommodation. So off we went and had a family holiday in this fabulous tower. I can assure you it was a wonderful place to go with 2 sons. I think they were aged about 5 and 3 at the time. And they had a wonderful, slightly terrifying week running up and down the stone staircases and along the barricade at the top. So the Lockhart arms showing very clearly this heart within a fetterlock in the centre there. And I have another representation of them here from the Lyon Register in 1957, the arms of Angus Hugh Lockhart of the Lee. And just in case we were in any doubt about the significance of the heart and the fetterlock, it appears not only on the shield, but also on the tabard of the dexter supporter and on the collar of the sinister supporter. And I put a little inset in it just so you can see the heart and the fetterlocks on the collar of the deer there. So why do the Lockharts bear a heart and fetterlock? Well, I suspect the most straightforward example is that it's simply canting arms. And it is simply a locked heart, a heart within a lock for Lockhart. But the family like to tell a different story, and there may be some romantic historicism going on here. But the story they tell is that the surname of the family was originally Lockhart, and Sir Simon Lockhart was one of James Douglas's party to Tiba in 1330. And while Sir James Douglas carried the king's heart in a casket, and he was responsible for the casket, Sir Simon Lockhart carried the key of the casket. And given the significance of being the one who locked and unlocked the heart of the king, the Lockharts then changed their name from Lockhart to Lockhart and changed their arms accordingly. Now, I'm slightly doubtful about this. It's a lovely story, but I suspect it may be more myth than reality. And one reason for thinking that is that the Lockhart arms didn't actually change to adopt the heart and fetterlock until the 1600s. That's the earliest examples I've been able to find, the early 1600s. Until then, they simply bore the boar's heads. So I suspect that, in fact, these are simply nice canting arms, a nice pun on Lockhart. It may also be another Douglas heart in that the Lockhart family is indeed from the heart of Douglas territory in Lanarkshire. And as I said, that tower is only 15 miles from Douglas. So it may simply be to show loyalty and connection with the very powerful Douglas family. Moving on from family connections, there are some rather bloodier reasons why hearts might appear in Scottish heraldry, and I've got a couple of examples to share with you now. And the first is from the Lyon Register in 1675, and you can see this fabulous drawing here. It's a bit blurry, and it's the arms of Seaton of Pitmedden. And it dates from 1675. The first and fourth quarters, you can make out 3 crescents with a blob in the middle. And that blob is a man's heart distilling gouttes de sang, or drops of blood. So the blob in the middle is a heart distilling drops of blood. The second and third quarters, the black splodge is a rather lovely otter, a crowned otter, in fact. You can make out the golden crown issuing from a bar wavy. And then I rather like, no need to repeat the blazon. The final line is simply third as you second, you fourth as you first. I think we should go back to that terminology, Russell, in our blasons today. But why did Seaton of Pitmedden have a man's heart distilling blood drops? Well, actually, the first thing I'd like to say is that this is an incredibly rare drawing of arms in the Lyon Register from 1675. The Lyon Register was created in 1672, and the early volumes, and this comes from volume 1, the early volumes only contained the written blazon, the form of wording. It was very rare to have any drawings at all, any illustrations of the arms. So we're incredibly fortunate to have Seaton of Pitmedden represented there, this lovely drawing from 1675. The Seatons of Pitmedden added this man's heart dropping blood, drips of blood, because the father was shot through the heart in the cause of Charles I against the rebels. So I'm assuming that at some point after the Restoration, some point from 1660 onwards, they then adopted that heart distilling drops of blood to symbolise the father's sacrifice in the cause of Charles I. The next example is a similar tale. It's the augmentation of Sharp of Scots-Craig, and it was first added in 1683, and this fabulous version of the arms is from 1917 in the Lyon Register. And just to make it slightly clearer, there's a little inset of the second quarter of the arms there. And you can see the second quarter is a heart, and it's being pierced by 2 swords. And as some further clues to the identity of Sharp of Scots-Craig, you can see that the heart is surmounted by a bishop's mitre, and the swords that are piercing it are in saltire, the cross of St Andrew. So why was an augmentation added to the arms of Sharp of Scots-Craig in 1683? Well, they were added to the arms of Sir William Sharp to commemorate the fact that his father, James, who was Archbishop of St Andrews, hence the mitre and the St Andrews cross, the saltire, James, the Archbishop, was horribly murdered by certain persons of hellish and bloody principles, again in the cause of the king. I think it just goes to show that being in the service of King Charles can be a dangerous and bloody work, quite frankly. Fortunately, no examples from the reign of Charles III. So this augmentation was added to commemorate the sacrifice of the Archbishop of St Andrews, James Sharp of Scots-Craig. Moving on from the slightly bloodier tales to my favourite category of arms, canting arms, where the arms are indeed a pun on the surname. And first up, we have a very easy example, the arms of Malcolm Hart from 2008. If your surname is Hart, then of course you might think about adding a heart, as he's done in the centre point of the shield. In fact, however, given the spelling of Hart there, it's more appropriate that his crest is indeed a stag, a hart. So he's got 2 different hearts to symbolise his surname, a hart and a hart stag. That's a fairly straightforward one. A slightly more subtle one, the arms of Charles Pearson from 1856, and rather beautifully, the swords are piercing the heart. So Pearson's arms are illustrated by a heart being pierced by 2 swords. In another Lyon Register mystery, the motto in this case is shown under the arms, and that is quite unusual in Scotland. The motto is typically shown over the shield and the crest. However, there we go, Charles Pearson from 1856. I think possibly my favourite example, however, is from Sir David Lindsay's Armorial again in 1542, and it's the arms of Moncur or Montcure. And you can see in the chief there are 3 hearts. And I think the idea is that these hearts are mon coeur, my heart. In French, mon coeur for the Moncur family. So a rather nice illustration of canting arms from 1542 there. The final example I came across recently from the Lyon Register, here the pun is actually on the surname Harris rather than Hart. Harris, the surname Harris tends to bear hedgehogs for Harrison. So we have 2 rather militant looking hedgehogs in chief, they look like they're wearing shields or something. But in base, we have a heart, and indeed the crest is a heart surmounted of a heart, just in case we were missing the point. So this American gentleman, William Edney Harris III, registered these arms in 2002, and the heart there is being used as a mark of difference within the family. It's not only the shields themselves that bear hearts. We've already seen a number of crests where there are hearts, typically indeed on animals or winged hearts. And there are some other examples. The next one is a rather lovely gravestone from Humby Kirkyard, just outside Edinburgh. One of my lockdown hobbies to get fresh air and exercise for the family, the boys, in a healthy way, was to take them around graveyards looking for heraldry. So my sons grew up looking for graveyard heraldry. I suspect they still bear the scars today. But anyway, on one of our expeditions to Humby, we found this lovely stone where the crest is shown, and it's a heart with a man's arm issuing out of it, bearing a scimitar or sword. And it's the grave of Edith Frances Buxton, but it was erected by her husband, Walter George Hepburn Scott, who was the 9th Baron Polwarth. So the crest there for Hepburn Scott in Humby Kirkyard. I mentioned at the start that I delivered a shorter version of this presentation to the Heraldry Society in London back in February. And after that, I was approached by a couple of members who were keen to share their own crests with me. So I'm delighted to share them with you now. And we have Robert Harrison in the meeting with us this evening. These are his arms. Robert is past president, very recent past president of the Heraldry Society, and a staunch supporter of heraldry in Scotland as well. And you can see his crest there rather fabulously. It is a dragon passon cooked of its tail, resting the dexter claw or on a heart gules. Rather lovely crest there bearing a heart. Thank you for sharing that, Robert. And also the arms of Stephen Slater. Now, his arms and crest do not have a heart, but his badge does. And you can see two versions of the badge there. It is a manche ermine issuing from a dexter hand, proper holding a human heart gules. And this artwork, I understand, was produced for Stephen by Marco Fopoli, and I'll come back to him and his artistry work later. So we've had a look at various coats of arms and crests and badges from Scotland, with a few mentions to those south of the border. I'd like to turn now and look at a slightly different vein of heraldry, and that is royal hearts. And these are the Hanoverian arms. I've given two representations, the arms themselves, but also you can see them here on a rather beautiful tabard, which is held in the collections of the National Museum of Scotland. And I was able to view it last summer. It's a beautiful 19th century Scottish herald's tabard. And you can just make out the royal arms in the background, but they're surmounted with an escutcheon of the Hanoverian arms. And of course, the second third of the Hanoverian arms is a Lyon rampant semi of hearts, or the field, sorry, is semi of hearts. And this, of course, represented the Hanoverian line that came into the royal family in the UK. My understanding is that it was removed in 1837 when Queen Victoria became queen, because as a daughter of the family, she was not recognised as an heir to the Hanoverian line. So she dropped the Hanoverian escutcheon, and the arms, the royal arms in Scotland and in England are as we know them now. So there we have an early-ish heart, royal heart in heraldry. There's a much more recent example though, and these are the arms of the Princess Royal. Now it's particularly appropriate to share these arms this evening because the Princess Royal is of course the patron of the Lord Lyon Society and has given us fantastic support in our work. So we're delighted to have her as the patron, and it's very fortunate that on the label on her arm, she has a 3-point label of course, and that middle point of the label bears a heart, and it's also reproduced on her two supporters. So the question is, and I understand it's a question she has posed to Mark Dennis, former herald, why is there a heart on the centre point of her label? Well, the more prosaic answer is that it's simply a cadency mark for the royal family. But I like to think that actually it is a reference to her father, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And you can see his achievement here, and that first quarter of his achievement, well, as the Duke of Edinburgh, you can see the Castle of Edinburgh, the arms of Edinburgh in the fourth quarter, but the first quarter is the state arms of Denmark. And of course, Prince Philip was Prince of Greece and Denmark. And you can see the Greek reference in the second quarter there. So the Danish arms feature in her father's arms and perhaps are the reason for that heart on the label, her 3-point label. So Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, bearing the Danish arms in the first quarter, which leads me very neatly into arms from other jurisdictions. And of course, I would like to start with Denmark. And you can see a representation of the Danish arms from the 14th century here in the Gelre Armorial. And I rather like this. In fact, I think it's possibly slightly more fun and more interesting than the official current version of the state arms today. The field is semi of hearts. And you can see we now have a rather modest 9 hearts, equally spaced across the shield. I quite like the 14th century version where it's liberally peppered with hearts across the shield there. There's a very interesting article by the heraldist Niels Bartholdi, and he suggests, where he investigates where these Danish hearts come from on the field. They date from about 1194 onwards. And he thinks that perhaps they might originally have been water lilies or sea blats, as they're sometimes known, or possibly even lime leaves. And he has a theory about why the Danish kings at that stage would have wanted lime leaves to symbolise a defence against thunder and lightning. But whatever their origins and the mythology lying behind it, they are very clearly hearts today. In fact, of course, I'm sure you all know that the Danish arms hit the headlines back in December, about 6 months ago now, for rather fun political reasons. You can see the two versions. The King of Denmark wanted to update his arms and move from the first version on the left to the second version on the right. And you can see much greater prominence in the second and third quarters being given to the ram of the Faroe Islands and the polar bear of Greenland. Now, I understand that he had engaged the Danish herald Ronnie Skov Andersen about over a year ago to work on an updated and revised version of the Royal Arms. And it just so happens that they were released and published and publicised in December at the same time as Donald Trump announced his intention to take Greenland into his control. So this was perceived as a very pointed but subtle heraldic statement of the King of Denmark's commitment to Greenland and the Danish commitment to Greenland. I'm not convinced of the truth of this, although that was indeed how it was reported back in December, but I think it's very appropriate if it is the case, because of course arms were originally intended to mark dynasty and political ambition and one's territorial claims. So it would be a very appropriate use of arms if that was the case. But you can see there the new version of the arms of the King of Denmark, and the first quarter remains the same with the field semi of hearts. Moving on from Denmark, we can travel to one of their near neighbours in Finland. Now, if you're like me, you will not have otherwise heard of the municipality of Lauka in Finland, but there is a municipality. This area in Finland is in the very centre of Finland, and it's famous for its abundant coniferous forests. So if you are based in the heart of Finland and you're famous for your pine forests, then it seems very appropriate to accommodate both these elements, capture both of these elements in your arms with a heart and some pine needles. It does look slightly, possibly like a turnip, but nevertheless, we have a heart and some pine needles. Now, we're getting towards the end of our review of hearts in heraldry, and in fact, it's fantastic to be able to share a very new and topical example. 2 weeks ago, this would not have been here, but for those of you keeping up with the news, you'll know that Pope Leo XIV has a heart on his arms. And this is a fantastic representation prepared just last week by Marco Foppoli, and I'm using them with his very gracious consent. I'm delighted to be able to share them with you. And you can see that in the lower half, there is a heart, a flaming heart pierced by an arrow atop a book. And this is the symbol of the Augustinian order. And Pope Leo may still be, a member of that order, the Augustinian order. So there's a tribute to that in his arms. And it was there before he was Pope. There was a very minor change to the arms, but this is how they are now. So Pope Leo has a flaming heart pierced by an arrow in his arms. My final heart example is a slightly different heart, and I'd like to thank Hugh Sherrard for uncovering this for me. It's the arms of the Australia and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists, and you can just see there that sinister supporter is a representation of Andreas Vesalius, who was a Dutch anatomist, and he is holding a book which is adorned with an anatomical heart. And as far as I know, this is the only anatomical heart in heraldry. If anyone has any other examples, I'd be delighted to see them. But I think this is the only anatomical heart in heraldry. So to look back over the last half hour or so, as we've seen, there are many hearts. They abound in Scottish heraldry and indeed further afield, and they're there for all sorts of reasons, whether valour, virtue, fraternal love, for bloody deeds, and indeed a pun or a play on the family name. But almost none were there explicitly for reasons of love. So I wanted to finish, there may be many hearts but little love, but just to reassure you that Scottish heraldry is not entirely bereft of love, I wanted to leave you with a parting note, love at last. And this is the crest and badge of Clan Scott, the Duke of Buccleuch. And you'll see that the crest itself is a heart, just the different sort of heart, and their motto is Amo, I love. So love at last, I think, in Scotland, and of course Sir Walter Scott's clan there, sending us a message of love to finish. And I'd just like to finish, this is the Flaming Heart of George Watson's College, a rather lovely representation again from the Lyon Register. And I'd just like to thank a number of people, Lord Lyon and the Lyon Clerk, for access to the Lyon Registers, His Grace the Duke of Hamilton, Hugh Sherrard, Daniel Connerty of the Lyon Office, and Marco Foppoli as well. And thank you all for your time this evening. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer, or any observations, I'm happy to hear. But of course, it is a beautiful evening in Scotland, so I'd hate to hold anyone back. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. There we go.
Well, Gillian, I think I have to say we love you.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful talk, absolutely wonderful talk, and really enlightening about all the different sources of hearts within heraldry, particularly Scottish heraldry. And I'm sure there's not anyone who was listening tonight didn't kind of fall in love with your talk in terms of what happened. And I don't talk in those terms normally, so there you go. And I would like everybody, if they could either just lift their hands and clap or put their thing up and say thank you to Gillian.
Thank you very much.